President Biden's sort of slogan for the campaign was Build Back Better. But right now, everything for Biden is just falling apart like a mega demolition. And that is not a good thing, even if you're a Republican. It's Rob Nelson Live.
Hey, I'm Rob Nelson. I used to host a show on Fox, and now I do a digital live stream called Rob Nelson Live. And my whole mission is to figure out how, in this time of division, we can find common ground.
Speech, and they're not allowed to do that anymore.
I understand what it's up.
They be focused on rebuilding California.
Oh, it's so true. Come on. This is where this gets real. He says your headings. I wouldn't want to be black and driving in a car. Right. Point there, right? Some of what's in this music, you can't sanitize it.
All right, everybody. Hey, welcome to Rob Nelson Live, Wednesday night show. So let's jump right into it. President Biden, with a lot of fanfare, launched into his term of office with a Build Back Better mantra. They all come with these slogans. Trump's like, make America great. Biden people are like, well, what are we going to do? Make America better? No, how about Build Back Better? That sounds good. Who comes up with these things? There's some PR department, right? Build Back Better. Make America great. Make America great kind of worked. I mean, you know, it led for fun stuff on either side. A friend who was a bartender, he's British and was living in LA, and he had a t-shirt that was like, Make America Great Britain Again. It always made me laugh. You do a lot with the Make America fill in the blank. Build Back Better. I don't know. Something about it just doesn't sound right. But I get it. We were coming, you know, he's elected in the middle of a pandemic and, you know, the country had fallen apart. So I get where it's coming from. But unfortunately, the Building Back Better part is not working so well right now. Let's start with the most basic build, infrastructure, right? Infrastructure is where you build everything. And the 1.5 trillion, you know, bipartisan compromise infrastructure bill. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there's a bill, it's $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill. And it went through a lot of politics to find a common ground because, you know, the original bill from the Democratic Party, and particularly the progressive wing, had tacked on a lot of things that traditionally wouldn't be considered infrastructure. I'm not going to get in the argument whether climate change is infrastructure or not, you know, childcare, you know, stuff like that. But half of it really wasn't infrastructure. But let's be honest. Infrastructure can be defined a lot of different ways, whatever you're building on. But they kind of narrowed it down, made a political compromise. Let's just stick to the core kind of infrastructure, like roads, bridges, broadband. Yeah, digital's infrastructure now too. So they agreed to make this deal for $1.5 trillion, which was really shrunk down from what it originally been with all these other things. And the agreement was, okay, Republicans and Democrats, and if you follow the news, it was a big deal. Biden somehow managed to craft a bipartisan thing. Sidebar, I don't know if Biden did anything, to be honest. I know I pick on Biden, but seriously, the guy looks like he's asleep. I mean, he's old and tired, you know? I mean, you can't deny it. I mean, he moves slowly. Yeah, okay, you can move slowly and your brain still be going fast. Talks a little slowly. They don't like to let him talk. We'll get to that. He reads off the prompter. He looks like he's like, you know, it's like the worst video you've ever watched. You know, I grew up in a time when you'd watch these, you know, educational videos and the guy's talking at the thing like this. But anyway, and if you watch Biden back 20 years ago, even 15 years ago, even 10 years ago, very different Biden. He had you know, energy, punch. But anyway, but so whether he did or not, the you know, they clearly crafted a bipartisan compromise, but it came with kind of a poison pill. And the poison pill was that Nancy Pelosi made an agreement that they would pass the infrastructure bill simultaneously with a $3.5 trillion additional bill doing all the things they'd taken out of the infrastructure bill. So now you have the Senate passed the $1.5 trillion pared down infrastructure bill, which they'd worked like crazy to get agreement on from both sides. And Nancy Pelosi in the House side goes, okay, but we're not going to pass that in the House because both houses, right, Senate and you know, House of Representatives have to pass it to get each, and then it goes to the president to get signed into law. So she says at the House level, we're not going to pass that infrastructure bill, even though we all agree with it, if we don't also include the $3.5 trillion bill as a separate bill. Okay. The logic sometimes of politics amazes me. Like, okay, guys, it's like you want $5 trillion worth of stuff. I go, no. I'll do $1.5 trillion. Oh, okay. You're in for $1 trillion. I'm in for $1.5 trillion, not $1 more, not $1 less. Great. Okay, you get the $1.5 trillion. Perfect. I'm in. But by the way, we're also going to separately put the other $3.5 trillion in here too. Wait. I just said I didn't want the other $3.5 trillion. Yeah, no, we do them together. It's sort of like the whole point of the compromise went out the window. Just change what you're calling it, move it over here, same stuff, different place, and do them together. It was never going to fly. I said this weeks ago. I was like, why do they think this is going to work? You got everyone to agree to this. And now you're saying, but we won't pass this if we don't also separately pass everything you just took out of it. It's a separate bill. See, it's not the same. It's not the infrastructure bill anymore. It's the new bill. It's not really the same thing. It's like, well, I don't care. I'm paying for it either way. I'm not going to go into the weeds on Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Christian Sinema, who are the two moderate Democrats that Democrats increasingly like to call not the Democrats, because Joe Manchin's basically president right now, right? The Senate is tied 50-50. Everything that goes through the Senate, if it goes down party lines, and we're tribal these days, needs 50-50. Each side lines up, it's a tie. Who wins? The Democrats. Kamala Harris is the vice president. She steps in, deciding vote, boom, done. Democrats can win anything in the Senate if they get everybody on board, even if no Republican joins, because they have the tie-breaking vote. And in the House, they have like a 5-vote majority, whatever it is, 6, 7, I forget the number, it's very small. And so they can pass anything there too if they have everybody on board. The problem is Joe Manchin has made very clear, I'm not paying for more than what I signed up for. $1.5 trillion, done. Meanwhile, there's a $3.5 trillion bill they're trying to get through. All these other goodies. And I'm not going to argue the merits of it. Some of it I think makes sense. Some of it I doesn't. I think there's a valid issue about spending another $5 trillion that would be total right now, which we don't have when we're in heading into almost a hyperinflation environment. And, economic growth is not moving fast. There's still, a fair degree of unemployment, although people are having troubles hiring people. But, it's a weird time to be fusing so much money into an economy. So it doesn't matter. He's like, nope, not happening, not doing it, not signing off on the $3.5 trillion separate bill. He's a Democrat. So that's like dead in the Senate. So back in the House, they're like, we got to pare it down. The progressives, led by AOC, are like, if you pare down the $3.5 trillion, we won't sign off on the $1.5 trillion. I know this is getting real complicated, right? But that's what it's like, politics. So bottom line, strip everything down. You got two bills, two different coalitions. One wants the small bill. The other agrees to the small bill only if they get the big bill. And the first side's like, well, we're not okay with the big bill. Meanwhile, Nancy Pelosi's tied those two together. So what is going to happen? The infrastructure bill that everybody agrees we should pass is going to tank because progressives won't vote for it if they don't get their second big bill on. And it's been made clear the big bill won't get the votes it needs. So it's going... And Biden has got to try to navigate it through. Now, we'll see. Look, give the guy credit. If they manage to pull this off, fair share will go to Biden. I mean, he's meeting with people now. I don't know where he's really at, but the political leaders in both parties would theoretically be working on it. But the Republicans are now digging in their heels. Shocker. And going, we're not gonna, maybe we just won't support it at all. They're like starting to walk away from everything. Nancy Pelosi cannot afford to lose more than a couple votes. So if the progressives don't vote in the House for the small infrastructure bill, it's dead. Dead. There's enough progressives to sink it, 20 of them. And they've said, we're not going to vote for it if we don't get the big one. But the big one can't happen because on the other side, they're like, we won't vote for the big one. So the whole thing could go tanking. So much for the domestic policy of Biden. Boom, blowing up. Grover Cleveland shares all the blame, Apprehensive Fly. That's an inside joke, even though I don't know why. But Grover Cleveland apparently did something, so he gets blamed for everything. Biden's almost as old as Grover Cleveland. All right, second thing, immigration. Immigration is tanking for Biden, too. I mean, it's not his fault. There's no immigration policy. There never has been. Up, down, all around. But everything bad that happened under Trump is happening under Biden. They're just not making it look like it's Biden's fault. Right? Biden's kind of like, come on in. You got thousands of Haitian refugees piled up underneath, tent camps and under bridges. And they're basically like, we're sending you all back. We're sending you all back. The conditions are miserable. At one point, the White House tried to block drones from flying over so you can't take pictures to see how bad it is. It is worse than under Trump. Now, are they treating people better or worse? I don't know. You get the picture of the border agents with the, like with the whips corralling people. I don't know. I mean, look, who knows? You're trying to move people on a border, trying to keep them from running through. It can't be a fun job. Not defending what they did or not did, but it's just the whole thing is an ugly mess. But at the end of the day, it falls on Biden's shoulders. He's got no immigration plan, got no immigration policy. And unfortunately, they got people piling up over on the border and they don't know what to do. So they're just sending everybody back. It's a mess. Meanwhile, foreign policy, you've got Afghanistan, which again, no matter how you want to depict it, was an unequivocal disaster. People can say, no, it wasn't so bad. It was bad. It was worse than bad. It was horrendous. You can say, but it would have happened no matter what. Maybe, maybe not. I'm going to make an argument why that's not true, but it doesn't matter. Happened on his watch. It was a unequivocal disaster. The whole thing, from start to finish, Kabul being overrun by the Taliban, us leaving, having our troops leave, abandoning our Air Force base before we had civilians out, being trapped in a civilian airport, cordoning it off, the Taliban controlling the city, American citizens all over the city unable to get in, foreign nationals who'd helped us, visa card holders, translators, people who worked in the embassy couldn't get out, and then a terrorist attack. It can't get much worse. It was a disaster. It was a military disaster. It was a foreign policy disaster. It was a humanitarian disaster. I mean, it was just an ugly mess. Our allies were mad at us because they're like, you just bailed out on us and left us there. The military was a joke. And we had a terrorist attack happen. It killed 13 American soldiers and hundreds or dozens of Afghan citizens. Meanwhile, we still don't have all the Americans out. And there's thousands of Afghan nationals who wanted to get out, who worked with us, with the coalition, and are in serious trouble. And I'll get back to that in a second because I actually talked the other day to a reporter who's embedded right now in Kabul, a female journalist, European journalist. Fascinating story, because she's a Western journalist, a woman, like the Taliban she interviews them and they don't look at her, but she's, access to them, an interesting perspective of what it's like on the ground there. But the bottom line is chaotic. People don't know what to expect. They're scared. They're confused. There's almost like she described it like two Talibans, the Taliban, the old Taliban, which like on everybody, and the new Taliban, which it's hard to know if they're just pretending or not, but actually want to try and do things differently. A clash. It's ugly. It's a mess. And people are scared and don't know what. Doesn't matter. Back here at home, the whole thing was an ugly, ugly mess. So as if that wasn't enough, Biden, at a time of our choosing, we will retaliate, manner in a time of our choosing. And what does he do? Launch a drone strike, right? Remember? And they took out the terrorists, right? 2 days later, and they were planning another terrorist attack, and we stopped it. See, we don't need to be there. We used our what they call over-the-horizon capabilities. We shot a missile target, and kaboom! We got him! Woo! Victory for America! Go, go, go! Except we didn't get any terrorists. Just killed civilians, like a whole family of civilians. Now, this is the problem. One, that we did it and it was bad that it happened. But even worse, right after it happened, if you remember, they kept asking, who did we kill? And the State Department, John Kirby, the State Department spokesman wouldn't say. He's like, well, we know we killed people. DOD spokesman, we know we killed people, but we killed terrorists, but we're not saying who they are. Why aren't you going to say who they are? First, people were like, they're not saying who they are, because they weren't really big terrorists. They were like baby terrorists, little people in the mix. Now, maybe they were going to do something, but we didn't get anybody big. It's so much worse than that. We didn't get anybody at all. We just got a Afghan citizen who works for a U.S. aid organization, helping people, and his family. How did they get that wrong? It's gotten very little press. It's bugging me over and over, guys, at how the media refuses, for the most part, to actively push back. I'll give the Washington Post and New York Times credit. They tracked it and figured out what happened. That's the only reason the administration admitted to it. The New York Times, Washington Post basically forensically reenacted, got camera footage, stuff, pieced things together, and like, this doesn't make sense. It looks like nobody who was a terrorist got killed. It looks like an innocent civilian and his family got killed. At which point the White House Defense Department came out and said, we admit we made a mistake. Horrible. We apologize. The Defense Secretary Austin, we apologize. You apologize? You just blew up a family with a drone strike. Can you imagine if Trump had done that? I keep making that reference because it's so obvious. If Trump had done all these things, people would be apoplectic. They'd have impeached him 3 more times. Point is, Biden gets a soft pass on it. But it's bad. Giving that soft pass is bad. Bad, bad, bad. Not just that it's wrong, it's bad for this country. We are so tribal right now. But here's a sidebar on that, by the way. I spoke to a long-time U.S. Guy who was military and worked in intelligence for a long time. And I've actually spoken to a number of people. And he actually knows the person who made the call. And the call, he said, was made minutes before the missile was fired. He tried to call and say, we have the wrong target. And no one took the call. Was that coincidence? Accident? Did they just want to go through with it and do it? Just to have it done and hope nobody knew? Or is it just a horrible, negligent mistake? In any case, whichever conclusion you want to make, 5 minutes later, he called again and said, you just blew up a car full of civilians. The Defense Department, the White House knew within seconds, minutes, that they had killed a family of innocent civilians. And they lied about it and pretended they didn't know for 2 weeks till the New York Times and Washington Post figured it out. Yeah, I do questions and comments at the end, Reddit, and sometimes I take them. Oh, Open Systems, thanks for helping out because you jumped in last week. Sometimes I just went blurry. Sometimes I take them. Hey, Economics 9871. Don't worry about my blood pressure, my friend. It's fine. And I love to get worked up. Nothing makes me happier. But if you got a question now, I'll take it. I'm on a roll. Look, I'm a little annoyed. No question about it. Because these things matter, That's why I'm worked up. You don't care what your politics are. I always felt like Trump got beat up too much by the press, but he deserved to get beat up. He deserved to get hammered half the time. I mean, the guy literally walked around like he was king, His ego was larger than anything, and he was clearly like kind of, megalomaniac. I get it. But Biden, they literally one pass after another. It's pointed out. I mean, at what point, you knew that a guy, you knew they shot a drone at civilians within 5 minutes. And you waited 2 weeks till the New York Times pieced it together and figured it out to come out and admit. And that whole 2 weeks, you kept saying, well, we don't want to say exactly who we killed, but they were terrorists. It's a blatant lie. And people should be held accountable for that. So lack of accountability is bad. But this gets to a larger issue. The media's propped Biden up a lot, and it's going to cost them. It's going to cost their credibility, and it's going to hurt Biden. The best thing about the so-called Fourth Estate is when it does its job, it holds people accountable. And for the most part, when it holds them accountable, it forces them to behave better. Now, Trump was a little exception to that, but the media didn't really hold Trump accountable. They literally hammered him no matter what he did. Good, bad, it didn't matter. If Trump did it, it was bad. Remember, passing the whole criminal justice reform, the whole criminal justice reform bill, the Second Chance Act, was a huge deal. First criminal justice reform in 30 years. And the media just hammered on him. Alice Johnson, who was locked up for 30 years because she let her phone be used for a drug deal. I mean, I interviewed Alice Johnson, 30 years in prison. She's like, I literally let my cousin use my phone. She doesn't pretend. I knew he was doing a drug deal with it, but what? I got 30 years in prison for that? Nobody died, I mean, Trump got no credit for that. So they went too far. And when you go too far, then the person like a Trump digs in and becomes even more crazy. So oddly, the press drove Trump to be more crazy, and he was already crazy. But the other side's equally bad. When you give somebody too many soft passes, the White House knows they can just get away with anything. They know they can spin it, and they'll get a soft pass. Maybe the New York Times and the Washington Post will hold them accountable. But most of the mainstream news coverage, especially, digital and broadcast, will do soft passes on things. If you know that, you just keep doing bad things. It doesn't help you. It doesn't keep you better. It doesn't make you better. It doesn't force you to step up and do things better. And that's what this country needs. I, from the start, wanted Biden to succeed. I had doubts about whether he would because I felt like he was a scarecrow candidate. There were other candidates I thought were a better choice who didn't make it in, but I wanted him to succeed. When I ask the question about political rants, I'm asking as someone who has a tendency to do it myself. That's funny. I'll answer the question. That's a great question. I love it, KK262KK. Where'd you get that name from, my friend? I'll tell you why. Because, it goes way back, right? I think we look, why do the people do the rants? Why do the people listen to the rants? People like me do the rant because I got a lot worked up in there and I thought it out and I have a whole theory on how it happens and why. And if I'm interviewing someone, I do it very different, right? I have a back and forth and ask questions and it's fascinating. But when I do a rant, a monologue, it's a chance to just kind of get it all out there and make an argument, make a case. It's like a mini movie. Why do people listen? Because I think it's a form of entertainment. Well, it's educational, but it's entertaining. It's fun to watch somebody get all worked up and crazy. If you don't agree with me, you're like, the guy's going to pop one. He's going nutty. If you're on my side, you're like, yes, more and more. I don't know. I ask you this, my friend. Bill O'Reilly, back in the days on Fox News, had more viewers who didn't like him than did, regular viewers. They did the demo. More people who hated Bill O'Reilly watched him every day than people who liked him. Interesting thing. Let me play a bit from Tulsi Gabbard, Tulsi Gabbard was a candidate I thought would have been a good president. She was a Democratic candidate, former congresswoman from Hawaii. While she was running for president, was actually still active reserve. She was a vet and was still in the active reserve, military reserve. Really stand up. She's a Democrat, not a Republican. And while she wasn't an ultra progressive, she was pretty liberal on most things and got hammered by the mainstream media and got hammered by the Democratic Party establishment, much as Bernie Sanders did in 2016. Here's what she had to say when it came out now more recently that one of Hillary's top people just got indicted by John Durham for making up the Russian collusion stuff. And by the way, I said 3 years ago, whatever, the whole thing, you knew the Russian thing was made up. It's politics, but it was made up. The dossier, the whole deal. Trump was bad, but that stuff was all made up. No collusion. And at the time, Tulsi was attacked by Hillary for being, and Hillary called her a Russian asset. That was Hillary's big thing. Call everybody a Russian asset. Everyone's connected to Russia. And here's Tulsi Gabbard. She's like, I'm a congresswoman. I'm sitting congresswoman. I'm a vet. I'm in Congress and I'm still serving in the reserve. And you're calling me a Russian asset? This is her explanation the other day for why.
That we have a situation in our country where the powerful elite, people like Hillary Clinton and those around her, the deep state, the media, they're all colluding to destroy outsiders who they deem as posing a threat to their power. Put country first, those who are not afraid to challenge the establishment and those who don't toe the line, they do all they can to silence and censor. It also happened to Donald Trump. It just points to this is not about Democrats or Republicans. It's about their concerted and collective effort working together to destroy and silence those who challenge their power.
So, again, I know a friend of mine. He does a really cool podcast, Mikasa Sukasa, out of Miami. He's a lefty. He's a leftist. He's like a libertarian leftist. No, but he's a leftist. A really cool dude. A Black Latino guy. Probably around 30. Just super smart. And he. Let me hold that question for a second, Open Systems. I'll get to it. And, he worked for he worked for Tulsi Gabbard. He was like her PR person and kind of uncovered a lot of what the media was doing. I mean, they went out, they took her down in collusion with the Democratic Party, much as happened to Bernie Sanders in 2016. The Democratic Party basically took him down for Hillary. And guys, for you, those of you who don't know, I worked in the Clinton White House when I was in law school, and I was right there. I wasn't I was right there inside the Oval, inside the West Wing. I worked with the top aides of Clinton and spent time alone with the president, and got to know Chelsea a little bit. And Hillary, I never got along with Hillary, but let me tell you something. Hillary has been this way the whole time. This is not new. This is not new to anybody who knows Washington. Hillary takes out her opponents any way possible. She was going to take out Bernie. She was going to take out Tulsi, and she was going to take out Trump. Doesn't matter. Going to take them out. But Tulsi's point is an interesting one, because what she's really getting at is that it doesn't matter which side you're on. If you go up against the establishment, they'll bring you down. And that is why I've argued and will continue to argue. We are going to see a populist movement. I keep saying it, that will emerge from the left and the right. Trump was a faux populist, pretended to be a populist message, but he wasn't really a populist. And that's why the whole thing kind of skewered off course. He wasn't a true populist. You can't really guide a populist movement if you're not really a populist. And you're going to see a rise of a populism on the left. I want to go back a little to the old days, like Huey Long, back in the 40s, but 30s. But there's going to be a new form of a leftist populism. AOC is the beginning of it, but she's not really a populist either. She kind of pretends to be. But you'll see both sides of the populism will rise because people don't want to be controlled. They don't want to be put down, and they distrust the elites and the powerful that crush them. And Tulsi Gabbard's point is that if you dare to go up against the system, if you dare to challenge the establishment, you will be silenced. Don't pretend for a second that's not true. You say, oh, Rob, you're being nutty. You're being crazy. People aren't censored. I'm not even picking on the social media platforms. There's a tribal mentality right now, a groupthink that they play into. But the powerful, the people in power, who run powerful corporate interests, many in our government, call it a deep state, people with deep-seated roots in the military, in the institutions, in the banking system. And no, I'm not a kooky conspiracy person, in big pharma. Washington's run over with lobbyists for big companies. Those people are pulling strings. The powerful elite will silence you if you dare threaten not just their views, more importantly, their system. The little neat power structure they've held together. That is why the crypto world has gotten so blasted for so long, because crypto challenged. It dared to challenge the central institutional bank of the United States. So for years, the U.S. was like, oh, crypto's bad, it's going to sink you. Meanwhile, they were buying up crypto because they know crypto's not bad. They know crypto could destabilize a central bank. You destabilize a central bank, you take the floor out of the power structure of a government. Suddenly, you can give everybody power. You can give everybody economic opportunity. Crypto people, cryptocurrencies are going to be our future, much like 25, 30 years ago. People doubted whether or not we'd ever have a truly virtual economy, right? People were like, people are never going to do that. And sure enough, and I was at Stanford at the time, the arguments, people arguing about whether or not people would ever truly go into a virtual kind of economy. Well, now virtual economy is obvious to us. Everything's online. Everybody's got a website. Everything's done digitally. Everything's done, up in the cloud. But people weren't sure it could happen. Crypto is going to take over. It may take 10, 20 years, but it's already starting. El Salvador just adopted a currency, and as its currency, crypto as its currency. It's going to happen, but it threatens. You threaten the central government. You threaten that power structure. It will do everything to destroy you. What was the question you had? I want to put that back up about why. Dave Smith, the libertarian. Dave, what's the second half of the question? So I'm going to push that back a little bit, open systems. I agree with you. One half thinks the country's Nazis and murderers. The same half slaughters unborn babies and hates America. I think that second half, though, is equally kind of doing the same thing. To say that they slaughter unborn babies and hate America is the same as them saying, you're Nazis and murderers. To me, I don't think most people on the left slaughter babies. They believe in the right to abortion. It's debatable. I am a pro-choice person to the extent that I believe a woman has a right to control the choices within her body up to a certain point, up to the point of viability. I also believe you are killing a life. But I believe taking of life is something we justify in all different ways. We justify all kinds of taking of life. You don't have to agree with me on. I'm just saying, slaughtering babies. That to me, they are in favor of a approach that's very different than yours. Is the people on the right Nazis? No, it's absurd. Nazis and murderers? No. But I think the division on both sides is each half calls the other side this extreme thing and can't back down. A good example of that. Let me use this as a good example of that. So watching the coverage that's come on Trump getting these behind these Secretary of States who don't think the election was real. And I watch CNN, the big lie. They keep talking about the big lie. And they're so obsessed with Trump's big lie about the election. And how can this still be going on? And how can he still be perpetuating this lie? And how can so many people believe the election was fraudulent? And they're truly incredulous. MSNBC, CNN, media across the board, except for Fox, and Newsmax, which is debatable media. But how can they're so incredulous? And I stop and I think, well, but for 3 years, you ran with the Russian collusion story, arguing Trump was not truly elected, and Democrats ran with Trump isn't really elected. It was an illegitimate election. He stole it. He colluded with the Russians. They impeached him for it. They tried, and they had, Mueller commission for 2 years, essentially challenging whether he was legitimately elected. We spent millions and millions of dollars and wasted tons of time and have prevented all kinds of progress, all to prove Trump cheated on the election, and only to find out he didn't, which I said at the beginning, they're making this thing up. It was pretty apparent early on he didn't. Their organization wasn't sophisticated enough to do it, for one thing, but he didn't. But I'm saying they're incredulous that people are still holding on to the big lie, which is a lie, that the election was stolen. But they weren't incredulous for 2 years, to sticking to this notion that Trump colluded with the Russians, and that's how he became elected. So it's this idea both sides don't seem to be able to see that they're doing the same thing to the other side. One side calls you Nazis and murderers. The other says you're slaughtering unborn children and you hate America. I think the reality is far more nuanced. That's just my take. Far more nuanced. But the obsessive tribalism is scary. The groupthink that we hunker down on is frightening to me. And I want to point out one more thing about Biden that troubles me. I have two tweets here, just real quickly. Kratzy, will you put up the so what happened is Biden was speaking with a foreign leader, and the foreign leader took questions from the press, is the British Prime Minister. And so the US press tried to ask Biden questions, and literally his staff shouted down the questions. They got so loud that you couldn't hear. It wasn't accidental. They're everybody talk loud, 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 so no one can hear what he's saying. No one can hear the president answer. I'm going, what the F is wrong? You are determined to keep the president from talking. So Ed O'Keefe, CBS's chief political correspondent, said this about it in a tweet, series of tweets. I'm just going to read you two of them. In the Oval Office at POTUS, Biden and British PM Boris Johnson meet to discuss pandemic to another issue. Johnson took 3 questions. White House aides shouted down U.S. attempts to ask questions. I asked Biden about southern border, and we couldn't decipher what he said. Literally, Ed O'Keefe's. It's Ed O'Keefe's a longtime journalist, CBS. And then the second half, he says, he just sort of follows up on it and says this. He says, as we were leaving, I asked the president for his reaction to the situation on the border. Due to the shouting White House aides, the noise of everyone leaving, the president wearing his mask, we could not make out his answer. Okay, so it's kind of redundant. Sorry. So thanks, Crafty. So point is, and these numerous reporters pointed it out. It was like the staff, the White House staff, started making so much noise that you couldn't hear what Biden would say to the question. They didn't want him to be able to hear and ask a question. I think it's time to have a conversation about a national divorce, since we are now devoid of anything that kept us together. The national, that's an interesting question. And the open systems, I'm going to take that up on another show. Should we have a national divorce? Yeah, it's very interesting. We kind of are having a national divorce, because my point, to go back to the thing about the big lie and about the Russian hoax, which are both lies. The Russian stuff was a hoax, and the big lie that the election was stolen from Trump is a hoax. They're both lies, both hoaxes, but both sides don't seem to realize that literally half the country thinks the one is true. Both the country split. We are maybe in a ugly divorce. The question is, can we have a reconciliation? Let me switch as I wind this up. And again, it goes on. I hate the lack of media accountability, I mean, the New York Post, the Hunter Biden story. Remember how that got suppressed and all that? And then what comes out this last week? The Swedish government releases emails that are clearly verified that they match emails on the laptop. We all knew the laptop was true, it was real. And yet they called it unsubstantiated. It's this determination to help one side or the other. That doesn't help. That doesn't help the country. The press needs to stop being so partisan. And both sides are partisan. Just one side's got more players in it. They're both partisan. Fox News, CNN are like two partisan ships. I watch them side by side. I'm like watching two different newscasts. Like same event in two parallel universes. It's bad. It's bad for the country. But what's underneath it that's really bad is the lack of dialogue. Excuse me. Sorry, economics. The currency is to give stability to make quick profit. I think you're wrong there, sorry, economics, but I'm going to do some stuff on crypto. And I spent a lot of time around a lot of crypto entrepreneurs in the last couple of months, including some of the people who've been part of kind of the build for 25 years of cryptocurrencies from Block 1, Tether on up. I think you will be surprised. I understand the arguments of stability. They made those same arguments about a virtual economy back in the mid to late 90s about trying to go off a retail-based economy. That there'd be no stability, no accountability, no checks and balances. Crypto can have stability, and it will. Sure, it'll move up and down like a market, but there are a lot of innovations coming out. And trust me, every major banking institution that dissed crypto had been buying up assets. And now almost all the major financial institutions are recommending that their clients own a certain amount of crypto. Every government has been actively involved in it. This destabilizing argument was kind of a red herring at some level, cooked up, because what it will do is it'll destabilize the central governments. That's true. But I'll do a whole show on that. I want to wrap into this last thing, though, about dialogue, because what happened is, if you remember back at the beginning of the pandemic, Fauci and company released a letter in correspondence in The Lancet, a very well-known, or Science, was it in Science magazine, in which they argued that anyone who said that the virus was done in a lab was committing a conspiracy theory, that it was clearly of origin from organic origin, from animals, people, whatever. It was not man-made. And it got a lot of press, and it silenced the media. Right away, the narrative came out from the media. This was, Trump was crazy for saying it was a lab leak and was just doing his crazy thing, and that there was no evidence, and that Fauci and company had made clear there was no scientific evidence. I cut to the fact that Fauci had a reason to do that, because clearly they were involved in gain-of-function research through the NIH, and he doesn't want that to come up. But even leave that conspiracy part aside. They made this up out of whole cloth, that there was no evidence it came from a lab. There was unbelievable evidence that it was organic. And it created this suppression. And I'm using this because this is not a political example. It's a medical one, but it's very interesting, because what happened the other day is a number of very prominent scientists wrote an article in The Lancet, which is one of the most prestigious medical journals. And I'm going to show you just the headline and read you a part of it, going back to that letter. Crafty, can we pop that up? So they say, an appeal for an objective, open, and transparent scientific debate about the origin of COVID. And then they go on and sort of set up what I just said, that it was published in a journal, and the authors associated any alternative view with conspiracy theories by stating, "We stand together to strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 does not have a natural origin." And the authors go on, thanks, Crafty. The authors go on to point out that led to a total suppression of having an alternate view, that the media suppressed it. Everyone suppressed it because Fauci and a couple other prominent scientists had done this. Now, again, there's a bad part of this. Fauci saved a lot of lives, by the way, both now and with HIV. But he's got his fingers in this gain-of-function research, which is what would have triggered that thing, and funding tied to it, or some other reason. But they wanted to suppress that theory. There was no, and it got it for over a year. And what they argue in this long piece in The Lancet, and these are really prominent scientists, and as I said, The Lancet's a really prominent journal, is that in doing that, they have set a terrible and dangerous precedent for how we operate as a scientific community. And I want to just read a couple things. It's a long article, and I recommend reading it. they say their concern is that we do not support the notion that scientists should promote unity. Because the Fauci and company had said, we support the call from Director General of the WHO to promote scientific evidence and unity over misinformation and conjecture. And the scientists in this article point out, science is not supposed to be about unity. They say, importantly, science embraces alternative hypotheses and controversy, contradictory arguments, verification, refutability. Departing from this principle risks establishing dogmas, abandoning the essence of science, and even worse, paving way for conspiracy theories. Instead, the scientific community should bring this debate to a place where it belongs in the columns of scientific journals. And their point to me is so profound. This idea that we suppress views we don't like, in science or not, it's misinformation. And that's what literally the article, the letter in a year and a half ago from Fauci and company said. This is misinformation if you say this. These scientists going, the very nature of science depends on controversy. It depends on, the very nature of science depends on controversy. It depends on views being shared. The very nature of science depends on controversy. It depends on views being shared that are differing, putting alternative hypotheses out, making conjectures, trying to establish new viewpoints and letting them clash. And when you take that away, you undercut the very ability of science to work. It's no accident that Galileo understood that the world wasn't flat, and they immediately tried to silence and suppress him for religious reasons. The church wanted none of that. What we grew to be able to do was let scientific discovery happen by encouraging differing views, by encouraging alternative hypotheses, by encouraging things that now get labeled as misinformation. We're seeing it in the COVID pandemic debate right now. I just spent time talking with several very prominent people in the non-traditional COVID space. Robert Malone, who is one of the architects of the mRNA technology. Whether you look him up, whether you agree, he never claims to have invented it himself, but it's the backbone, the technology that's in the vaccines, mRNA. He developed for 20 years, and he gets accused of being an anti-vaxxer because he says that there are issues with this technology that he thinks in this vaccine that aren't right, that aren't safe, and it hasn't been adequately tested. And people call him an anti-vaxxer, and he's like, I've spent my entire career developing vaccines. Like, that's what I do, you know, and that's what mRNA will be, and it will be a life-saving vaccine, but that doesn't mean I can't challenge whether or not there's problems or mistakes in what we're doing. Same with Pierre Corey, if you know, went on Joe Rogan and is big, you know, a fan of using ivermectin in early treatments. Same thing, you know, Corey, you know, said to me, he's like, you know, he gets dismissed as he's a quack. The guy won the British Medical Association President's Choice Award. He's a pulmonary intensive care specialist. COVID's a pulmonary disease. His textbook is one of the most widely read textbook in medical schools today. It's read by thousands of students across the world all the time. His medical textbook on pulmonary issues. But when he says, I think we can treat COVID, early treatment can save lives, he's considered misinformation. And somehow he's dismissing the pandemic when the guy would say COVID's the most complex disease we've ever seen. It's a terrible, deadly killer. But I think there are ways we can save lives that we're not using. And one of them is ivermectin. You're misinformation. And the point is the scientific community only works when you allow competing ideas out. And that's true for the political community as well. When we silence the other side, and both sides, when we go, your view can't listen to, your view can't be heard. When we create that polar divide, not just a division, a divide so wide we won't even walk over it to connect, to clash, to have our ideas come together. Your view can't be heard. We undercut the very essence of what makes democracy work. And we all, every one of us, suffers from that. Something to think about. Thanks for watching.